at the George DeSiero City and County Buildings Council Chambers located at 1 Tacoma Drive, or watch live on Channel 8 through live streaming on Broomfield's website. The public may also participate in public comment either in person or by calling 855-695-3744 and pressing star 3 to be placed in the queue for comment. Please note that if you're calling in for public comment and would like to speak on more than one item on tonight's agenda, you'll need to press star 3 each time to be placed back in the queue for comment. Public comment will be limited to 90 minutes total per item. The first 1 through 15 participants in the queue will have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 through 25 participants will have 2 minutes, and if time remains, the next 26 plus participants in the queue have 1.5 minutes to speak. Again, if joining us virtually for public comment, the number is 855-695-3744 and press star 3 to be placed in the queue. Screeners will ask callers for their first and last name, neighborhood, and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. If joining in person, we'll ask you to come to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record. The City Council meeting is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Anderson. Here. Cohen.
Here.
Groom. Here. Hinkle.
Here.
Jezierski.
Here.
Law Evans. Here. Lynn. Here. Lindstedt.
Here.
Schaff.
Here.
Tessier.
The quorum is present. Will everyone please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In an effort to keep order for tonight's meeting, I ask council members to limit their comments to 5 minutes. If council members are given an opportunity to speak for a second time on an item, they should limit their comments and communication to 2 minutes. Abby will be assisting with the timekeeping and will plan on a 10-minute break at approximately 8 p.m. We will begin with council's review and approval of this evening's agenda. Council may add or remove items from the consent agenda, or council may revise the order of business for the meeting. Does any member of the council have any comments or questions regarding this evening's agenda? Seeing none, are there any objections to this agenda being approved? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. This evening, we have 2 items under petitions and communications, starting with the proclamation declaring October 2021 as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Will the representatives for this item please come to the podium to join Mayor Pro Tem Jezierski for the presentation of the proclamation and introduce themselves for the record.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and esteemed colleagues. My name is Molly Judson, and I'm the Manager of Child, Adult, and Family Services for the City and County of Broomfield. Joining me tonight to accept this proclamation are 2 representatives from the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence, SPAN, who is our domestic violence provider here in Boulder and Broomfield. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you so much for your commitment to addressing domestic violence and working together to end it. My name is Ann Tapp. I'm the Executive Director at Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence. And Javier, can you introduce yourself?
Good evening. My name is Javier Cau, and I'm a bilingual counselor and advocate for Safe House Alliance.
So if the council has any questions or any comments they'd like to make, we're happy to hear them.
Thank you, Ms. Judson. Thank you all for being with us this evening. Will the clerk please read the proclamation?
Proclamation declaring October 2021 as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the City and County of Broomfield, Colorado. Whereas domestic violence remains a pervasive issue across the City and County of Broomfield, the United States, and the world, with implications for personal and community health. And whereas Domestic violence does not discriminate and touches all communities regardless of age, race, disability, gender, identity, or socioeconomic status. And whereas considering medical expenses, lost productivity, legal costs, and property loss and damage, domestic violence costs victims nearly $82,000 over their lifetime and collectively costs the United States $3.6 trillion. And whereas research shows that by creating communities where people are connected, supportive, and care for one another can reduce incidents of domestic violence. And whereas every day in the city and county of Broomfield, individuals and organizations play a part in supporting people impacted by domestic violence and providing services including therapeutic, legal, educational, housing, advocacy, and medical services.
Thank you. We will now proceed with public comments. Are there any public comments on this agenda item? All right, not seeing any online either. Are there any council member comments? Would you like to have any final words?
Well, first of all, I have to say, the start of this meeting was the best council meeting I've ever seen. And again, just, we're very grateful for our partnership with Broomfield County, and want to particularly thank Molly and Kari for their leadership in really raising the issue of domestic violence as a centerpiece to how we do prevention and support our families. So thank you again for your commitment. We appreciate all that you do to support our work and support individuals and families in the community.
I think we appreciate you joining us and for all the work you do to address domestic violence. This evening, we'll also have a brief update on the 17th Judicial District and Broomfield Municipal Program for Juvenile Diversion. Ms. Hoffman, will you please introduce our presenters for this item?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. Vanessa Oldham has been working hand in hand, as has her team, with Brian Mason, the 17th Judicial District, Adams and Broomfield County. Been rolling out this project for quite a while on the 17th. So in Broomfield, we have tweaked it a bit and we are doing municipal juvenile diversion. Vanessa can fill us in a little bit more on that, but I believe we have 3 kids that have in fact been diverted from the system into this diversion program. We hope it to be a great success and laser focusing in on, instead of what to do when they're in the system, how to keep them out of the system altogether. Ms. Oldham.
Good evening, Council, Mayor, and Pro Tem. Again, I am Vanessa Oldham Barton, and I am the Director of Development, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the City of Broomfield. And Ms. Hoffman did a wonderful job of explaining kind of where we are and the process right now. Just wanted to take a moment just to thank you guys for your commitment and your patience as a small group of us work to try to find an alternative for our Broomfield youth outside of the criminal justice system. And we are super excited that alternative turned out to be right within our grasp and our reach. And so again, we are going to be working with the 17th Judicial District Diversion and Restorative Justice Program. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to introduce District Attorney Brian Mason to discuss what this partnership really is going to look like.
Good evening, members of City Council, Madam Mayor, and Mayor Pro Tem. I'm Brian Mason, the District Attorney for the 17th Judicial District, and that includes Broomfield County. So I am your District Attorney, and it is a pleasure for me to address you. I think this is my first time addressing you since taking office in January. And one of the things when I first met with your outstanding city and county manager that we discussed was how can we better keep kids out of the criminal justice system. And the District Attorney's Office has long had what I believe is one of the best diversion programs in the country. And for those who don't know what diversion is a program within the District Attorney's Office by which we divert people out of the criminal justice system. So when someone commits often a low-level crime and doesn't have a long criminal history, And we don't want them in the criminal justice system at all. Instead of charging them and making them go through the court process and eventually taking a conviction and starting a criminal record, we divert them into this diversion program. And the diversion program is intense. We provide counseling, drug counseling, mental health counseling, addiction counseling. Restorative justice means that they have to take accountability for their actions and meet with their victims and allow the victim to be heard and then take accountability for what they did. And at the end of that program, if they successfully graduate, they don't go into the criminal justice system at all. And I'm very proud to say to this community that in our diversion unit at the DA's office, we have an 85% success rate. What does that mean? That means when someone graduates from diversion, for the next 3 years, 85% of our graduates don't come back into the criminal justice system at all. That is a fantastic model. Now, what we're proud to announce tonight is that we're expanding that program here specifically in the city and county of Broomfield to young people, to juveniles, specifically in your municipal court. So I won't get into the details of the different levels of courts, but we have district court, which is felonies, we have county court, which are misdemeanors, and then the city and county of Broomfield has its own municipal court that also deals with low-level offenses. And juveniles who go through municipal court have never been eligible before to go through our diversion program. And so working with your outstanding city employees, with Vanessa, with Chief Krieger, and of course with Jennifer Hoffman, we're very happy to tell you tonight that we're starting this new diversion program for juveniles in your municipal court who can go straight into our diversion program. And the benefits of this are myriad. It's too many to even discuss. But one of the great things that we can do and that we're offering is allowing the Broomfield Police Department to send kids straight into diversion. So they will actually hold their tickets. They'll hold their arrests. And instead of starting a criminal history, we're putting them straight into diversion. And if they can succeed through the program that I just described, those kids won't start a criminal record at all. So many of you have heard the term school to prison pipeline. And people ask me, what are you doing about the school to prison pipeline? This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're doing about the school to prison pipeline. This is going to keep kids out of the criminal justice system. So I'm very proud of this, and I'm very proud to be working with your entire staff and community, and proud to be your DA, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mason. Next, we'll take public comment on this item, or is there any member of the public that would like to speak? I don't see any online. Next are council member comments. Any council members? Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you for coming tonight. Since you're here, and since we're talking about youth diversion, could you put in context, crime in Broomfield is low statistically compared to surrounding areas. So obviously any kind of crime captures a lot of attention. And just in the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 high-profile murders, which sadly it appears that the alleged assailants in each case were very young. I think one was 19, one was in their early 20s. So could you maybe put in context for people the situation of crime in the community right now, the increases we're seeing right now, mostly I believe in car theft, and then how youth diversion might be a positive force moving forward?
Well, there's no question that crime is up, and you are right to point out 2 homicide cases that we have had in the city and county of Broomfield in the last month. And this community is not used to that kind of violent crime, nor should it get used to that kind of violent crime. But there is an increase in violent crime across the country. I believe it was on the front page of today's New York Times. So addressing that and addressing the causes of that increase is super important to us. In the city and county of Broomfield, I know that your constituents are noticing an increase in auto thefts. That is also impacting the entire 17th Judicial District and, quite frankly, the entire metro area. How do I think this program can help with that? Well, by getting kids at an early stage when they have, for whatever reason, out of desperation, out of peer pressure, out of need for cash or hunger or whatever it may be, feel like their only option is to turn to some kind of a criminal act. If we can get them early and get them before they have committed a crime that is so serious that truly diversion would not be appropriate. Obviously, homicide cases, sexual assault cases, not appropriate for diversion. But if we can get them when they're stealing a car or vandalizing somebody's house or property, those are serious crimes, but those are crimes that if we can get to the defendant early, get to the child early, we can help turn that person's life around. And like I said, we have an 85% success rate. So the statistics show that by giving them services early, mental health services, drug addiction services, all the services we just discussed, they won't return to a life of crime. And that's why I'm very excited to have this program in Brookfield.
Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, District Attorney Brian Mason, for being here with us tonight. This is a great program, and thank you to our staff, and thank you to the judicial district's willingness to set this up here in Broomfield. This is something that, I think that we even had a conversation many years ago about diversion programs and what that could mean for Broomfield. And so I'm happy to see this step being taken. I think that this is very important. But I think obviously this comes with a cost. So can we talk about what this means for Broomfield and how much this is going to how these costs are going to be covered through this program?
That's the pretty cool thing about this relationship, and one that did not require negotiation, but rather capitalizing on the services from a volume perspective, and then discussions internally with our new municipal judge, Amy Bachman, through the lens. So Dino Bennett, who isn't here tonight, really led from a municipal perspective what this program could look like. There aren't dollars attached to this, Councilmember Schaaf, at this point. Again, we're capitalizing on the services that are already made available to juveniles in Adams County. I believe that we're the only municipal court that is accessing a juvenile diversion program from a court district perspective. Again, it's part of nurturing that relationship with the 17th Judicial District. So standalone costs, if we were to stand it up on our own, we've done that before, would be anywhere from 30 to 40,000, depending on the number of kids. And given that we have a low number of kids that will go through this program, oftentimes it doesn't make sense from a cost benefit ratio. But again, when you can partner with partners like Brian and Tony, it makes all the difference. So we're hoping that eventually there will be dollars attached, Councilmember Schaaf, because that means the program is working, we're expanding it. And from a service delivery perspective, whether it be community service or service systems after hours or on the weekends, I would think that would be considered a success for this program.
So I'll just add to that, Councilmember, that of course, the city and county of Broomfield pays part of the budget for the district attorney's office already, because we are your district attorney's office. In terms of the expanded services that we are now going to provide to the city and county of Broomfield, I'm doing it free of charge. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but my office has no jurisdiction typically in municipal courts. So that's why we've never had a program like this before. We have already an existing diversion program that serves Broomfield and that serves your constituents and my constituents when they get charged with a crime that will put them into county court or into district court. Muni court is separate. It's under your authority. It's not under my authority. And so we've never had a diversion program there. For you to create a separate diversion program as a city and county just for your municipal court would be very expensive. I have the capacity now to already do that for you. And that's why we're doing it. And we're doing it as a partnership, and it is essentially already covered by our budget. If this program succeeds spectacularly, we may need some money to keep it going at some point. And I hope that that day comes, but at the moment, it's costing you nothing.
Cool. That's great to hear. I think that, I've seen this, in my youth, not me personally, but friends that grew up in my neighborhood, didn't have the opportunity to go through a youth diversion program. Some of those kids, now adults, are still in jail from their low-level crime that they committed back then, and they continue to repeat crimes later in life, becoming more and more serious. So those are just the kids that lived around me in the surrounding neighborhoods. So I guess the flip side of what is the cost of Broomfield not to do this program? We know the numbers on what the cost of one inmate in our criminal justice system. But can you speak to that on what is the cost if we don't do this program?
There's no question that the statistics are very clear that preventative measures are far more cost effective than putting people in jail or in prison. And I can give you statistics on that if you invite me back. I don't have those at the tip of my tongue, but it's dramatic. So the cost of keeping somebody in prison for just 1 year is $30,000 per person. And you all know that we have an incarceration problem in this country, and so that costs a lot of dollars. When we can keep somebody out of the criminal justice system altogether, it is exponentially cheaper for the community. And that is certainly one of our goals in this program, is not only trying to keep people out of the criminal justice system, which keeps our community safer, but it also improves our criminal justice system when we have programs like this.
Thank you. The last question I have is, you talked about the 85% success rate for graduates. 85% of those that graduate don't come back to the criminal justice system within 3 years. I just want to clarify that it is. So that's 85% of graduates. How many, what is the success rate for the program itself? How many of those individuals that come into the diversion program actually graduate?
I don't know that statistic off the top of my head. It's a good question. I'll ask my director of diversion to get you that number. It's pretty high. We have a pretty good success rate. We're strategic about who we put into the diversion program. They have to go through an intake program before we even accept them, where we evaluate whether or not they'd be a good candidate. And one of the things that I said earlier is, when someone goes into diversion, they've committed a crime. We have essentially been prepared to charge them with the crime. We have what's called probable cause to charge them with the crime. In order to get accepted into diversion, they have to actually accept responsibility for what they did. Sometimes someone comes in and says, I didn't do it. I'm innocent, which is absolutely their right. But then that person isn't a good candidate for diversion. In order to get into diversion, you actually have to take accountability for what we believe the evidence supports. And because of that stringent intake process, our success rate is pretty high in terms of graduation. But I led with the statistic earlier because I think that's the more important one. Not just how many people can get through the program, but how many people, what percentage of our people who get through the program we never see again. And that 85% success rate there is pretty staggering, and one that I'm very proud of.
Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Any other council member comments? I'm just so happy to see this come to fruition, because we have had conversations about it and with Judge Bachman as well. So thank you. Thank you for including Broomfield and for taking such good care of us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me tonight.
We'll move to public comment next. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on matters other than the items already listed on this evening's agenda. As mentioned earlier, the public may comment both in person or via phone. If you're joining via phone and want to be placed in the queue for comment, please call 855-695-3744 and press *3 to be placed in the queue. If you're joining in person, please line up behind the podium, and public comments will be limited to the time limit outlined earlier. I do have some online. Oh, we have somebody in person.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and staff. I'm here because of the air quality monitoring and the latest trigger canister report. After reading that report, I started thinking to myself, what is a safe level of benzene exposure? Extraction is supposed to be following the best management practices. Yet, there are clearly dangerous benzene levels. What's the city going to do to protect residents' health? Prospect Ridge Academy is not far from the Northwest Path. From what we have heard from the scientists, benzene travels in plumes, very concentrated plumes. So if the winds shift, which we cannot control, those plumes and high levels of benzene will be blowing towards children. So I ask, what is a safe level of benzene exposure? Do we know the long-term health impacts of those that are exposed to these levels of benzene? We can't file health complaints for things that are going to happen in the future. Benzene causes cancer, not immediate symptoms. So again, what is the safe level of benzene exposure? And what are the health impacts of this kind of benzene exposure? And what is the city going to do to protect its residents? It is long past time we have a serious public discussion in these chambers about health impacts from chemical exposures and whether the city is prepared to accept the consequences of residents being exposed to a carcinogen as a result of this project. Long past time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comments in the chambers? Okay, we're going to go to online public comments. We have 4 people in the queue, and we'll start with Claire O'Brien.
Hello. There you go. My name is Claire O'Brien, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, a nonprofit in Boulder. I have lived in Colorado my entire life and have been deeply disturbed by the history of nuclear weapons in this area and the United States as a whole. In my role at the Peace Center, I am frequently confronted with the reality that nuclear weapons pose a very real and very imminent threat to our world. Here on the Front Range, we have to constantly attempt to mitigate the long-lasting effects of a nuclear weapons plant that is no longer even in operation, but whose radiation will continue to affect the land, people, and animals for thousands of years. Broomfield has been an incredible ally in our efforts to mitigate and reduce this risk posed by Rocky Flats by rejecting both the Jefferson Parkway and Rocky Mountain Greenway projects. Those decisions set a strong precedent both to your constituents and to the other governments in the area. I'm here with my colleagues today to encourage you to continue to set a precedent by passing a resolution in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In January of 2020, the UN came together to sign this treaty in honor of the victims who have suffered from these weapons around the world. While 86 countries have signed the treaty, the United States has continued to deny it. We are urging local and state governments to pass resolutions in order to show support and to pressure the federal government to sign on to protect not just ourselves, but the entire global community. This past weekend, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a speech once again encouraging the United States, as well as other nuclear states, to sign on, stating that the global community can no longer let the threat of nuclear conflict cloud the work that needs to be done in other sectors of development. The money that the United States government puts towards nuclear weapons could be used to end the COVID-19 pandemic, offer healthcare to our communities, or a myriad of other productive rather than destructive programs. Nuclear weapons should not be a part of our future, and I urge Broomfield to take a stance towards that future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Giselle Hertzfeld.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. Hello, my name is Giselle Hertzfeld, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, and also as a youth organizer who is deeply concerned about the looming threat of nuclear war, particularly given our own region's disturbing history of nuclear weapons production at Rocky Flats. I want to begin by expressing my enormous gratitude to the City of Broomfield for being such a strong ally in the effort to keep public development off of Rocky Flats. Your rejection of both the Jefferson Parkway and Rocky Mountain Greenway sets a strong example to other local governments and demonstrates your deep commitment to protecting the health and safety not only of Broomfield residents, but of anyone living near Rocky Flats. I commend you for your strength and courage in standing up against the nuclear weapons industry that has threatened the safety of our nation and planet for so long. This past January, our world witnessed the incredible power of the global movement standing up against nuclear weapons development when the United Nations signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons into international law. Since then, over 60 state, county, and city governments in the United States have passed resolutions in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in order to create the internal pressure that is needed for the federal government to de-escalate our nation's nuclear weapons program. In March of 2021, Denver City Council became the first city in Colorado to pass a resolution in favor of this treaty. I'm here to request that the Broomfield City Council also pass a resolution in favor of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and I would be happy to follow up with examples and resources to draw from. Our hope is that the more municipal governments pass these types of resolutions, the more likely our state legislators will be to pass a similar resolution at the state level. The need for U.S. nuclear de-escalation could not be more urgent. The 2021 Department of Defense budget estimates that U.S. nuclear forces will cost a total of $634 billion over the next 10 years, which is a 28% increase from the 2019 estimated cost of $494 billion. Every dollar that is spent enhancing our nuclear weapons program is money not spent on healthcare, housing, education, food, infrastructure, and the transition to renewable energy. Worse yet, every dollar that is spent on nuclear weapons creates a much more dangerous and radioactive planet for us all. The fight to stop nuclear weapons must occur at every level, and you have the power to help set a strong precedent here in the state of Colorado. Thank you so much for hearing me today.
Thank you. Next, we have Chris Allred. You have 3 minutes, Chris.
Hi, good evening, Council. This is Chris Allred from Longmont, and I'm here in solidarity with Giselle and Claire to request a resolution in support of the prohibition, the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. As was mentioned in the previous comments, Denver City Council unanimously passed a proclamation in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That was in March of this year. And so I'm reaching out to other local governments to stand in solidarity on this important issue. It is urgent because the federal government continues to fund a modernization program of nuclear weapons. And that isn't only modernizing the current weapons, that is building new weapons. They made 70,000 plutonium pits at Rocky Flats. And there are now plans to make more at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. And that would require an entirely new plutonium bomb plant. And they're still being made at Los Alamos in New Mexico. And these weapons do not make us more secure as a nation. They make us less secure. And they escalate the possibility of nuclear war. And they use our tax dollars to make weapons of mass destruction. So I'm asking you to please continue your brave leadership in the region. I have great respect and admiration for this council and your leadership. Please stand in solidarity with Denver and pass a resolution in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Usama Khaled. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Usama Khalid, and I'm a climate activist youth who works in various nonprofits here in Colorado. I've lived in Colorado for over a year, and I've learned about the various tragedies that occurred at sites such as Rocky Flats. I want to firstly thank you all for taking a stance against development near Rocky Flats in the past. I'm coming forward to you today on behalf of Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, along with my colleagues, to ask you to pass a resolution in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I've reached out to all council members and mayor via email regarding this issue, but I have not heard a response back. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is an important resolution to show solidarity of victims of nuclear weapons. Already, Denver has passed this resolution, and I would love to see Broomfield take a powerful stance on this issue as well. Nuclear weapons are not a new topic when it comes to Colorado, and many of the citizens who reside in Broomfield see the lasting effects of plutonium from Rocky Flats. Nuclear weapons are a dangerous form of so-called self-defense and should be banned from being used. They pose a threat to the entire world if misused and can end in a catastrophic tragedy. I urge you all to consider what I am asking and will gladly talk more about this issue one-on-one. Please feel free to contact me at usama@rmcjc.org for more information. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Next is council's community and event update. Before asking for updates from council this evening, I would like to ask Friends of Broomfield to join us at the podium this evening for a special invitation.
Hello, Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Christina. Thank you for having us come to your meeting tonight. We are Friends of Broomfield. We are adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have a day program, a residential program, a work program, a social program, and a travel program. You and the leaders of Broomfield have supported Friends since 2006, and we thank you. Every year we have a fundraiser called the Friends Variety Show. We always choose a theme. As you can see, this year is rock and roll. Because Friends rocks.
I am Tamara, and my friends would like you to come to our show. Sunday, October 17th at the Alamo Drafthouse in Westminster. You can get tickets on our website at friendsofbroomfield.com. You will have a great time listening to music through the decades with our music videos. Thank you for your support. You rock.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Thank you so much for having us tonight. I wanted to ask permission for them to approach you to hand you an invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, they need one too.
Can I get a picture of you guys from the dais?
Yeah.
Guys get together, I like taking pictures from the dais.
Can we see everyone? There's one in the back. Well, there's one in the back. I have one in the light.
Yeah.
Everybody. All right, 1, 2, 3.
We appreciate the very special personal invitation, and you can count on us to be there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, friend. Oh, yeah, let's see. Hey, don't leave yet.
So I just wanted to let you all know that even though we're wearing masks, everyone up here had a great big smile. And I love the hair. I love the hair. So here's my real question, and for people who weren't in the room just before the council meeting, will that clip be featured in the show?
Yes.
So my next question is, how much do we have to pay you to not have that? Yeah, well, I could take up a collection of it. But no, really, thank you so much for the invitation. It means so much. I love your organization. I love your spirit, but I really love your hair.
Thank you so much for participating. Yes, this is we're doing music videos for our show. We started that last year with the COVID limitations, and it went really well, and they were able to watch themselves in those videos. So this year we're putting that together. This is one song, and we just wanted to involve the community in a way that we could. So thank you so much for allowing us to tape you, and we won't give out any names if you don't want. But please come and see yourself on the big screen.
Any other council member comment? All right, we'll let you go. Enjoy your evening. Thanks for You should start every meeting with an entrance. What do you think, Gail? Okay, you're in charge of picking the next song. Okay. Before we continue with tonight's agenda, I want to remind council and the public that today is National Voter Registration Day. National Voter Registration Day is a nonpartisan civic holiday celebrating our democracy. First observed in 2012, it's quickly gained momentum ever since the nearly 4.5 million voters registering to vote on the holiday to date. Please do not forget to register to vote. Council's consideration of the consent agenda is next. Following the clerk's reading of consent agenda items 7A through 7D, we will ask for public comments. Will the clerk please read agenda items 7A through 7D by title?
7A, approval of minutes from the regular meeting of September 14, 2021. 7B, resolution number 2021-153, approving an application for a trash, rubbish, and garbage hauling license for Best Cleaner Disposal, Inc., doing business as BCD. And resolution number 2021-154, approving an application for a trash, rubbish, and garbage hauling license for Luterra, Inc., doing business as Clementine Curbside. 7C is resolution number 2021-162, authorizing and approving a memorandum of understanding by and between the city and county of Broomfield and Adams County Clerk and Recorder for emergency election relocation procedures. 7D is resolution number 2021-151, authorizing and approving a construction agreement with Moltz Construction, Inc. for the nutrient improvements project at the wastewater treatment facility. And resolution number 2021-152, authorizing and approving the First Amendment to the agreement by and between the city and county of Broomfield and Carollo Engineers, Inc. for the engineering services of nutrient improvements at the wastewater treatment facility.
Thank you. Before we ask for public comment, staff has requested to provide a brief update to council on item 7A. Manager Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. Erica Delaney-Lou, City County Clerk, will walk us through the brief correction.
Yes.
Delaney-Lou.
Thank you, Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. We have an amendment to agenda item 7A, and that's a correction to the minutes of September 14th, 2021 City Council meeting. The action notation for item 11D, which was the consideration of ordinance number 2158 regarding gray water regulations, should be amended to note that it was Councilmember Schaaf who motioned and Councilmember Lim who seconded the motion to approve ordinance number 2158. That's the amendment that we propose as you consider the entire consent agenda. And thank you for your time. Sorry for this error.
Thank you, Ms. Delaney Liu. We will now proceed with public comments. Does any member of the public have comments on these agenda items? We'll start with in-person. Line up behind the podium. I'm not seeing anyone online either. Does any member of council have comments on these agenda items? Before I ask for the motion, I want to remind council that based on the staff update earlier to amend item 7A, the appropriate motion for this evening is to approve item 7A as amended and approve items 7B through 7D as outlined in the staff report. Is there a motion? Councilmember Schaaf.
All right, I'll try it. I move to approve item 7A as amended and item B through D as outlined in the staff memo.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you, Councilmember Lyman. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. This evening, we have two resolutions for the Board of Social Services review. The meeting of the Board of Social Services is called to order. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll for the Board of Social Services.
Anderson. Here. Cohen.
Here.
Broom.
Here.
Hinkle. Here. Jezerski.
Here.
Law Evans. Here. Lim. Here. Lindstedt.
Here.
Schaaf.
Here.
Tessier.
Thank you. A quorum is present. The first item for the board's review is a resolution acknowledging the expenditures and electronic benefit transfer for April 1st through June 20th, 2021. Board members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Deputy Director of Human Services, Kari Hunt, is joining us this evening in Dan's absence. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. This resolution is acknowledging our social services expenditures for April 1st, 2021 through June 30th. And I have Anita Dye up here with me so that at least one of us knows what we're talking about. So this is asking the council, this resolution is asking them to acknowledge our review of the social service expenditures. I don't know, there's no fiscal impact to local funds. These are all federal expenditures, and I guess invite any questions from the council.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Hunt. We'll now proceed with public comments. If there's any of the member of the public that would like to comment, please step up to the podium. I'm not seeing any online either. So questions from the board are next. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none. Next is the Board of Social Services consideration of proposed resolution number 2021-159-BSS. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2021-159-BSS by title?
Resolution number 2021-159-BSS, acknowledging review of expenditures and electronic benefit transfers for the period of April 1, 2021 to June 20, 2021.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Groom.
I move that resolution number 2021-15B-BSS be adopted.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Henkel? Second. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Will the clerk, all in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The second item for the board's review is a resolution approving an intergovernmental agreement between Broomfield and the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing for public health emergency funding. Board members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Once again, Mr. Hunt, let's see if you are fortunate enough to move through this next one without a question.
Let's see. This resolution recognizes funding from the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing intended to fund and help us manage workload at the end of the public health emergency that we've experienced for the past 18 to 19 months. The state has funded us to the tune of $78,368,036. There are no matching local funds, and this will be to fund the overtime work that we expect we'll have to take on in order to work through the workload that we have from the public health emergency. I have with me Karen Anastas, the manager of our self-sufficiency and eligibility unit, who can help me answer any questions from council or from the public.
Wonderful, thank you. We'll now proceed with public comments. If there's any member of the public that has any comments on this agenda item, now's the time to come up to the podium. Seeing none, next is board member comment. Any board members have any questions or comments? Councilmember Shah.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just have one quick question. So have we received this public health emergency funds before, or is this the first year because of the pandemic?
This is the first year of this funding, and it is in response directly to the pandemic.
Okay, and so with regard to the unspent funds at the end of the period, I mean, is it likely that we will have unspent funds, or do we anticipate spending all of those plus more funds?
I'll let Karen give a more precise answer.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Karen Anastas, Self-Sufficiency Manager, Department of Human Services. We have proposed expending almost the entire amount of the budget. I think we anticipate less than $1,000 reverting back to HIPAA if we don't need the funding. So it will be a very minute amount that we would allow to go unspent. We will recover and charge to that cost allocating account as much of our services as possible as it ties to this particular need.
All right, thank you for that. That's all I have, Mayor.
Any other board member questions? Seeing none. Next is the Board of Social Services, consideration of proposed resolution number 2021-155-BSS. Before asking for a motion, I want to remind everyone that item 8B is an intergovernmental agreement and requires 2/3 approval of the Board of Social Services. Will the clerk please read proposed resolution number 2021-155-BSS by title?
Resolution number 2021-155-BSS, authorizing and approving an intergovernmental agreement by and between the city and county of Broomfield and Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing for public health emergency funding.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Hinkle.
I move that resolution number 2021-155-BSS be adopted.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Groom.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Seeing there's no further business before the Board of Social Services, this meeting is adjourned. And thank you for being here.
Mr. Hunt joined the wonderful journey of marriage this last weekend.
Well, there is no business before the Board of Health or Broomfield Housing Authority this evening. The first item under council business this evening is council's consideration on the first reading of proposed ordinance number 2164, amending certain sections of Title 16 of the Broomfield Municipal Code relating to reverse setbacks from plumbed and abandoned facilities. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Anna Burton-Zetti, Director of Planning, will introduce the item. And of course, Nancy Rogers is here to field additional questions as well. Ms. Burton-Zetti.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Anna Burton-Zetti, Planning Director. If you could have the next slide, please. The City Council has held a few different study sessions to discuss reverse setbacks over the course of this year. We had one in March, April, and August. In July of this year, Council approved ordinance 2156 regarding reverse setbacks from pre-production facilities. And ordinance 2164 is being brought forward for first reading based on direction provided in the study session in August. So this would address the reverse setbacks from plugged and abandoned wells. During the study session, staff was directed to bring back this ordinance with a 250-foot reverse setback. This is greater than the existing 50 by 100-foot workover easement, which will remain a requirement for any plat containing a plugged and abandoned facility. The ordinance incorporates the same exceptions previously included in ordinance 2156 regarding exceptions for previously approved and existing residential developments, as well as exemptions for property that is zoned A1A. Next slide, please. This map shows the potential 250-foot setback from existing plugged and abandoned wells. Additional wells are going to be plugged and abandoned, so therefore this map is subject to change in the future. For example, some newly plugged and abandoned wells are located in the Palisade Park area and have been updated since the last study session. It should also be noted that surface owners do not typically control when an operator is plugging and abandoning a well, but some surface owners have had success with working with the well operators to help to pay for or monetarily compensate to move up the plugging and abandonment. Next slide, please. There are some projects in close proximity to plugged and abandoned wells. I've included only the projects here on the slide without vested rights, but there is an additional table in the staff memorandum with the vested rights. Staff is identifying these projects as the exceptions that are included, and administration of this ordinance would have impact on development proposals. These projects largely already have residential zoning in place. The two exceptions are the Palisade Park Brownstones Phase 2. This is proceeding through the public process currently, and it began earlier this year. And the Farmette, which is in the Wilcox subdivision, which was considered a concept review a few years ago, but did not proceed. Considering the exceptions included in the draft ordinance and the existing locations of the plugged and abandoned wells, as well as the anticipated additional wells that could be plugged and abandoned in the future, implementation of the proposed ordinance will largely occur along I-25's corridor and significantly more on the east side of I-25. Next slide, please. So here we have the 5 exceptions that were included in the prior ordinance related to pre-production well setbacks, and these are included in the draft ordinance this evening. It should be noted that in addition to this list, reverse setbacks implemented by this or any other future ordinance regarding reverse setbacks would not be applicable to properties with vested rights. Next slide, please. In addition to this ordinance, City Council chose to continue discussions regarding the reverse setbacks for production wells to a later time at the August meeting. So an additional study session will need to be scheduled to continue those discussions as directed. And as always, staff is here to answer any questions as they arise regarding discussions on the first reading of this ordinance.
Thank you, Ms. Bergetti. We'll now proceed with public comment. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? We'll start with in-person public comment. So if there's anyone that would like to be heard, please come to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record. I don't see any online. On the phone. So questions from City Council are next. Members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against is later. Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. A couple of my questions have been answered, and thanks to staff for responses to those questions. I do have, the responses raised another question for me. So this is, I think it's in response to the first question here. It was regarding 1756-040A for plugged and abandoned wells. In Broomfield should be located. This is from the language of it, that section that poison abandoned wells in Broomfield should be located, excavated, surveyed, and permanently marked by a brass plaque. So as we more accurately determine the location of the wells using the magnetometer, have our inspectors been able to find these brass plaques for all the wells in the developed areas? I'm just curious, like when we're looking at the wells that we knew the location of some of them we couldn't find the locations. Are those brass plaques, are those all known in the developed areas, or are we still locating some of those wells?
Andrew is heading to the podium right now.
Andrew Valdez, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives for the time being. Mr. Valdez.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. So those brass plaques are underground. And for the wells that we have located in the Anthem neighborhood, we can actually see the signature of the plaque. It's like a rectangular thing. So we would expect to find those things in the future surveys. But again, we've only done 9 because we were bringing this program in-house. So we actually just received a magnetometer today, and we hope to get up to like maybe 40% by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's really all the questions I have. I have more comments, I guess, so thank you.
All right, Councilmember Moon.
Okay, well, I guess the question is, if we have not located all of the brass plaques, then how would we measure the distance from the well to the residential lots?
Thank you for the question. When we receive an application for a plat that has an identified well, a collected abandoned well, we ask for a picture of that brass plaque. So we make the applicant go to the field, find it for us, locate it, and provide us the exact coordinations so that we know exactly where it is. That survey information is then used for drawing the plat and determining the distances.
Okay, that's great. How did the COGCC arrive at the 150-foot setback that they suggested for P&A wells?
Take that one as well, Councilmember Lim. So there's no rule, there's guidance that COGCC has. So again, their purview is subsurface, local government is mostly surface. They have a 150-foot guideline, and it is based nothing on public health. It's only based on sort of technical requirements needed to get into a well, to have equipment moving in and out. It's nothing to do with health.
Okay, thanks. And what distance, we recently had the Carlson 124 P&A. What distance did the remediation efforts need surrounding that well? The footprint, yeah.
Yeah, they were about, I would say between 200 and 250 foot square. We have heard from operators that they could operate in a smaller footprint, but a 250 by 250 allows them to get in and out as soon as possible.
Okay, and in case anybody doesn't know, where was that located?
Next to Aspen Creek School.
That was our notorious well that was right next to our school, okay? And what was the length of it, and there are other recent P&A well that had a failure and needed extensive remediation over, well, almost a 2-year period. What was the trench length along Davis 43-6?
Yeah, so I think both of those trenches, they're certainly both over 200 feet. I think one was like 215 and the other one was about 250, the lateral trenches.
Okay, and why were those trenches needed?
To provide an escape a path of least resistance for subsurface methane.
Okay, thank you. This is, for, I guess, legal then. So if we were to pass this ordinance with the, 250-foot, reverse setback from P&A wells, is there a variance process to this?
There isn't a specific one set forth in the ordinance like we've seen in other ordinance, but as with, and I believe I'm gonna look over to Anna, we discussed this as with other portions of our code. Anyone could come and request a variance from the application of an ordinance to their operation development business.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Any other council member questions? Councilmember Wyden.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if this is for Anna or who, but the map shown in the staff report on page 4, and that you showed in your presentation, Ms. Brittenzetti. So is that map is for all the wells that are, thank you, that's perfect, that are currently either dry and abandoned or plugged and abandoned or within the city boundaries, is that correct?
Thank you for the question. For clarification, yes. This does not include shut-in wells.
Right.
Those are different classification, but these do include the plugged and abandoned wells, not the shut-ins.
Okay, so this map is showing what that we expect. The status of these wells is not going to change. They're once plugged and abandoned, always plugged and abandoned. I mean, it's not like they will go away or anything like that any more than they already are. That's a stupid question. You understand what I'm asking?
I do understand what you're asking, and yes, these are expected to remain where they are.
Okay,
Yes.
so whatever ordinance we put in place is going to be kind of a permanent feature of the landscape, unless the ordinance is changed. But so do we have a map showing the plugged and abandoned wells on this map that are not affected by vested rights? That would not be affected by this ordinance. Do we have a map of that, or a percentage even?
I don't have an exact map for you, but I can walk you through. It's a very small percentage.
Okay.
Most of the plugged and abandoned facilities that you're seeing, wells that you're seeing on the map, are already within built residential developments or with invested property rights, like North Park development. Otherwise, like an example of the built environment would be Anthem, Wildgrass, Wilcox neighborhood, or it's exempted from the ordinance as drafted, like the Wilcox neighborhood, which is A1A, so most of that is exempted. So really the wells that would be, or the property around wells that would be most impacted would be east of I-25. None of that has vested rights. So any wells that you're seeing east of I-25, and then those shown just immediately on the west side of I-25. So those on the northern section of Palisade Park, and then further to the north, where we have some rural residential properties and agricultural properties.
So, and do you have a sense of what percentage of wells that would be well, wait, let me restate that. Let me ask you a very specific question. Do you have a sense of what percentage of wells would be affected by this ordinance out of the total population of wells shown on the map?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a very rough eyeball estimate would be something around 25%, 20 to 25%.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. So, and most of those, yeah, okay. So, and is there, going along with, following up on Councilmember Lynn's question of a variance process or informed consent, if a property owner did want to do something, develop or redevelop or something like that, we don't have anything like that in this ordinance, in this draft ordinance. Is that right?
That's correct. Specifically in this ordinance, it is not included, but the most development in Broomfield is done through a PUD process, planned unit development, which is a custom zoning document. And through the PUD plan process, as well as through the site development plan process, A variance can be requested from any element of Title 16 and 17, and these requirements are contained in Title 16. So anytime that a property were to request a PUD plan for like the east side of I-25 or further north on the west side of I-25, if there was to request to redevelop, a PUD plan would be requested and they could request a variance through that process.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Any other council member questions? Councilmember Shao?
Thank you, Mayor. So, reading this ordinance, it only applies to residential unit, or residential uses. So with that 25% that you mentioned, that doesn't preclude commercial uses being constructed according to other outside of this ordinance. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councilmember Schaaf. That is correct. The 25% is just a reference of the total number of wells, but you're correct. It does not impact other non-residential land uses.
Okay, and then can you walk me through how this ordinance would be applied? So if there is a plan that is going to construct around either a well that is going to be P&A, actually that's where my question is. If a well is going to be P&A as part of a project, how would that project continue to proceed and getting to that piece of where that point at which it would be P&A?
We actually have some real life examples of that, Council, in the Broadlands, where there were wells that were not plugged and abandoned when the development occurred around the wells. So what happens is the developer comes in with the PUD plan to establish the overall zoning and development standards. They may also proceed with a site development plan to refine architecture, exact street layouts, landscaping. They can even go as far as creating a final plat. They just create tracks. So in the areas that were within the setback, they would have to, for the difference between, let's say, a pre-production facility and then a plugged and abandoned facility, that difference, they would create a tract of that size. The tract means it's a non-developable lot. They wouldn't be able to get a building permit. So it would be that change. Once it becomes plugged and abandoned, those properties become eligible for residential use. They would come in and replat those lots consistent with the site development plan. And that's how that area kind of infills with the residential.
Okay, thank you for that. And then kind of going along that same, but with a plugged and abandoned well, at what point do we have in the process for that well to actually be tested so that it's not impacting the development after it started to be built?
I think I'll ask Andrew to step in about the inspection program, but certainly during the process, we require them to provide information about the plugging and abandonment and reclamation process that occurred when it was plugged and abandoned.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Councilmember Schaaf?
Yeah, so as a development, as a area is being planned, development plan going into process, at what point are we checking, inspecting that well to ensure that the rest of the development can continue to proceed?
Like if there was a plugging and abandonment concurrent with a land development project?
Yeah, well, no, this well has already been plugged in. So what I'm trying to prevent is what we experienced with the well up in Anthem, where you start to build a project around that plug and abandonment, right, and we find out that there's an issue with that P&A.
Right. So that's exactly the purpose of the soil gas testing program. So, once we have this fully established and it's a mature program, the intention is that we're soil gas testing twice a year, all the plug and abandoned wells in Greenfield, about 110 of them. And I think we can do this on a biannual cycle.
Okay, all right, so we would know well in advance of that process, what the integrity of that well was.
That's the intention, yeah.
Perfect. All right, thank you so much. Yep, that's all I have, man.
All right, Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Valdez, I have one question for you. Sorry about that. Thank you for all these questions from my colleagues and answers from staff. You guys have done a thorough job and I really appreciate your work.
And I know you've been, had a lot added to your plate recently. So I just wanted to ask a question about the well up in Anthem and the way, surface area works, right? Generally, if you want to let more methane escape, you will make a broader trench to move that methane faster. So I'm curious, working with surface area, are we creating more surface area for it to evaporate? Because we do the same thing with our wells, or like our window wells, right? We add more gravel to create more surface area to dissipate that water. So when we do that for the trenches, did they do that because they were in a hurry to make it longer, or could they have done it in a shorter distance?
Yeah, so the Davis really was kind of a unique case because of the road. So as far as any investigations we've done, a remediation project like this is unique. So were we to find a problem, another, plug an abandoned well, the remediation would be kind of site dependent. Is there water? Is it rural? Is it urbanized? Is it in somebody's basement? Is it a backyard? It would be kind of fact dependent. So it's kind of tough. Maybe if you could say like what scenario you're thinking about, we could then talk with our environmental consultants and see like what the remediation might look like.
I was just curious if we knew the reasoning behind the distance of the more than 215 feet. Yeah, in that scenario, was it because something else needed to be built faster and they needed to let the methane out quicker? Or could it be a slower leak with less length of a lateral? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So the laterals were intended to be over designed. They were intended to cover more of the area than we had seen methane. Remember, the developer actually put in a series of wells post the first series of wells that were installed, soil vapor wells. And they built the trenches to go beyond where the methane readings were detected from the second series of wells that the developer put in, if that makes sense. If I had a diagram, I could make it better.
Yeah, I don't know if I quite understand that. Is it because there happens to be more methane than expected? Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, again, the design of the trench was meant to go beyond where methane was seen via the testing.
Okay. In order to do what?
To just be conservative.
Okay, so that was a conservative decision.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lansdale?
Thank you. So with the Davis 43-6 well being kind of a unique circumstance, do you think that the COGCC's recommended 150-foot setback would be reasonable with these remaining wells up by I-25 that don't have vested rights? Do you see any wells up there that fit that same unique circumstance?
Well, if I were putting my COGCC hat on, they would say that's a local government issue.
Okay.
Yeah, they try and stay out of it.
I understand. So do you think any of those wells, from a local government perspective then, fit that 250-foot need as compared to that 150-foot need?
The ones you saw on the map.
Yeah, just the ones without vested rights up north along your I-25 that this ordinance would apply to. So my point is that I don't want to use a very unique well as the prime example. So I'm wondering, are these other wells up there likely to be in that same level of concern?
So that is generally more rural area, right? So it doesn't have the compounding factor of the urbanization. So, before I made any declarative statements, I'd want to look at each one. But in general, again, the Davis was unique and the problem was exacerbated by the road and other factors. So, I want to look at all those.
Yeah, that's a tough place from a hypothetical answer.
It was meant to be a tough place. So
and probably not one for staff to answer.
I just didn't, I'll save it for my comments, but I want to make sure we're using fair comparisons when we're talking about all these wells up north. Thank you.
Any other Councilmember Anderson? Oh, you already went, right? Okay, I have a question before we do the second round, if you don't mind. And I guess it's from Ms. Burton-Betty. Regarding the Farmette, because it is in the code, the transitional overlay access district, and it is A1 now, rural, it would be exempt as is, right? But the rezoning would put it in a new category where it loses the exemption.
That's exactly right, Mayor. So if it were to develop with a rural residential lot, so one house for every half an acre, or 1 acre actually there, that would be permissible under this ordinance. The Farmette was proposing a much higher density, which would necessitate the rezoning, which would then trigger compliance with the ordinance.
Okay, got it. And then I guess I have a question for Mr. Valdez. In terms of this anomaly, I guess, you could say, I don't know if it's anomaly, but how many other incidences like this, the Davis well methane leak, have we seen across the Front Range?
Well, so in investigations, we're looking at like a failure rate of around just shy of 1%, given the geology, given the basin, given the technology that's used, it's about 1%. So we may discover, we're prepared to discover potentially one more in Greenfield.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, Councilmember Cummings, sorry, you didn't get to go yet.
I just have one minor question, as part of my education. To follow up on Councilmember Schaaf's question. No, all wells are not the same, but we don't really have a record of, or do we? Looking at these wells, their age, when they were plugged, how they were plugged. I assume it ranges a large spectrum, and there weren't necessarily best practices 50 years ago. So in terms of unique wells, we really can't predict or we don't know which ones were plugged in which way and how old they are, correct?
Yeah, so I looked into this a little bit last night, actually. Here we go. Okay, so between 1976 and 1997, which are the oldest wells in Broomfield, we have 9. The rest, 1998 to 2008, we have 53. 2009 to today, we have 48.
Would it be fair to say the plugging methods changed over time? Or has there been a revolution in that area?
Yes. And more than anything, kind of the record keeping, reporting requirements, compliance, notifications, things like that. That's really what got tightened up, especially in 2008.
Any other first round? Let's go to Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I do have a couple more questions now. I want to go back to some of the well failure at Davis 43-6 and the conversation that we had with the COGCC in these chambers. It was Mike Hickey, I think that was here. And we talked about is the Davis 43-6 well just a one-off? And it was brought up that we live in an area, especially up in that Highway 7 little area where we sit on wrench faults. And do we know the extent of those wrench faults? Like this may not be, if that played a role in it, it kind of matters. And I'm not expecting to have the answer to that.
Yeah, no, so they are maps, I think, on the COGCC database that show a lot of the coal mining, like coal seams and things like that we're talking about.
He called them wrench faults.
Wrench faults. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky.
So that's something that I should have sent that with the staff a little sooner. That didn't come to my.
Yeah, I could do a little follow-up. So you're asking if those have been like mapped and characterized?
Yeah, what the extent of them are, because that may very well play a factor in the Davis 43-6 well failure, was my understanding. So that's your follow-up. And then you just discussed the failure rate of, the wells in this area, just shy of 1%. But, this is a concern that I have, I know others share it, is we have another, there's so many years into the plug and abandoning of these. Some of them are 1976, with about like 50 years, and some of them are more recent, but another 20, these are here forever. They're always going to be in the ground. They're never going to go away. So 20 years from now, or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, looking forward to the next generation. And would we anticipate that failure rate to remain at 1%? Or, is that possible that as these wells become older, that failure rate could increase? That's another really difficult question.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that this is, as wells are decommissioned and, local government and state government are left to deal with these, is going to become an issue of higher significance. And, I think probably in a time horizon of like 100 years, we're talking about that we might see, a well that was maybe perfectly preserved and plugged and abandoned might have failures. Concrete it shrinks over time, very, very, very slowly, but it does shrink. So yeah, it's possible.
Okay, thank you. And then I live in Anthem Highlands, as probably everyone knows, and we have several of these wells in the Anthem area. I actually just recently found out, I think about 250 feet from a plug and abandoned well. It's 25 feet from an individual's home. So now when we look at the Davis 43-6 well versus whether we didn't have homes built near it, versus if we, as a subsurface, as our soil gas testing program gets underway and we test more and more of these wells, if we discover a methane leak in a well where there's homes up, 25 feet or just over away, how different would that, just thinking about the bringing in the workover rig and the impact to the community and the safety aspects, that would look different, right?
Certainly. Yeah, how they would do it, how a remediation would be designed, again, would be fact dependent.
But it would just be the workover rig would essentially be in somebody's front yard that is standing right up to their door and blocking the street potentially, is kind of what I'm thinking. It's going to look differently than when they dug up the road when there weren't homes existing. Yeah, and then the last question is, you just went over the numbers for the dates for the plug and abandoned wells. I didn't quite catch all of them, but from 2009 to today, there was 48.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the post 2008 rules, and then many of them were the pre 2008 rules. But extraction oil and gas, as part of their operating agreement, Exhibit C, which we just had today, was several of those wells were recently plugged and abandoned. So do we know, and this is one I should have sent you ahead of time also, do we know the wells up in the northeast corner where we haven't seen building versus the ones that would be already in existing homes? Do we know how many of those are post and pre 2008 rules? Because extraction did all the wells, extraction on gas plug and abandoned, which was like 40 or 50. It was significant. Those wells were mostly south of 160th for where they were drilling, if I recall right.
It looks to me like yes, this is the list. And they have one left to do in Broomfield.
And we haven't, so, but those were all in the areas, much of that was wild grass, broadlands, areas that have already been developed.
Yeah, it looks that way.
So I think this would be an interesting, this is a question not to be answered tonight because we don't have the time, some data here, but I would guess that a lot of those pre-2008 wells are actually in that northeast corner, because the ones that were just, so many of the ones that were just plugged and abandoned were, were just plugged and abandoned were the ones as part of the extraction operator agreement.
I briefly looked at this also last night, and I couldn't really determine like a spatial pattern with, time of plug and abandonment and where they land on the map. That is something we could look at. And you specifically interested in the extraction ones?
No, which the dates of the ones in the areas the ones that are not in the undeveloped areas.
Yeah.
Those are more of the pre or post 2008.
That'd be a pretty easy thing to pull together.
That would be interesting information, and thank you, that's all my questions.
Thank you. Any other council members? Councilmember Lynn?
Broomfield just recently had another find. Our inspectors found that the Shannon Roberts well in the north, in that northeast section east of I-25. It's a shut-in well, and our inspectors just found out that that was leaking and notified the COGCC. What was noted about by the COGCC about the relative condition of that well?
Okay, so minor point of clarification, it was a leaking storage tank.
Okay, thank you.
It wasn't the well head like itself. And we did dig up the COGCC documentation. What was noted on the condition of the facilities. I think that'll probably be the next piece of information that we get. The first action that was taken was the draining of the residual fluids in the tank. And I know COGCC is to or has inspected the tank, and they will provide some sort of report. So we don't have that information yet, but it will be forthcoming.
Were there any notes in the COGCC documentation about previous citations to that site?
To that site? Well, so I am aware that, so this is an operator that no longer exists, so it's an added problem, right? And COGCC is trying to collect on a bond issue from maybe the owner of the operator. With this specific site, Broomfield hadn't noted any issues. But I do think that there might have been a failed test in one of those wells, failed mechanical integrity test. But I want to make sure I'm not.
I guess the question is, we have, again, a very recent example of this need for remediation, this time with the shut-in well in that northeast section of east of I-25. So I guess the question would be, is that characteristic of generally the condition of the oil and gas facilities east of I-25?
Right, okay.
And can we anticipate problems with the P&A wells in that way?
I would say that the primary driver, at least in this case, is the fact that we have an absentee operator. And they weren't doing testing, they weren't doing their own inspections, we have no one to talk to report stuff to. So the primary driver of this thing, I would say, is just an absentee landlord. Yeah, that being said, you put metal out into the environment, things degrade. And if no one is out there looking at this stuff, it can go unaddressed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Law Evans?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to do a little definitional discussion here. Having just enough geological and geographic knowledge to make myself either really stupid or really dangerous, I looked up the definition of a wrench fault, and apparently that's an oil field term. It's not really, it sounds kind of scary, but it's just simply a strike slip fault in which the fault plane is at least 45 degrees over more than half to recognize the extent of the fault. So I think we could, if we choose, we can drop the slightly scarier sounding terminology of wrench fault and just go with the strike slip fault. I did also, just for the fun of it, look up the USGS database of active faults in our area, and this part of the world is remarkably stable. And with the exception, well, we'll get into ancient history, but I just thought I don't know, do a little geology lesson. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member questions on the second round? I just have to make a point, but it's not really time for that. I just think about all the garbage that they leave behind after they get what they want. And I wonder what other industry gets away with that. Only one. So next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2164 on first reading. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2164 by title?
Ordinance number 2164, amending certain sections of Title 16 of the Broomfield Municipal Code relating to reverse setback from plug and abandoned facilities.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Lim?
I move that ordinance number 2164 be adopted on first reading and ordered published in full. That a public hearing and second reading of the ordinance be held on October 26, 2021 at 6 p.m.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Anderson?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Lyman? Okay, Vincent and Lyman.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really torn on this one. You know, the biggest challenge we have with development in our community, by far, from my perspective, is existing oil and gas infrastructure and the possible safety and public health concerns that can create around your developments. And it's become a very difficult problem that we've been trying to address since I got elected, and it's continuing to be challenging. So I guess my thoughts are on this ordinance. I'm wondering if we're doing this in the wrong way. I'm wondering if a variance process with a large setback is the simplest and best way to fix this problem. Clearly, 25 feet, you know, from homes and P&A wells is not sufficient, like what was built earlier in this community. But is this the best way to do this? I think instead of a variance process, maybe what we should consider is making sure there's a setback that allows access for maintenance and future work on these P&A wells. And between that and our soil testing program, that's, you know, bi-yearly now, which is really great. Maybe we could put requirements in on builds that are within this range. Maybe we do what we did with the challenges we had on that latest development, and require gas detection systems, gravel beds. I don't know. We could come up with a set of safety regulations on developments within, I don't know, 250 feet of these P&A wells, and then approve a setback that allows work to happen on these wells, so that we're not ending up here discussing a variance on every single development along I-25, with councils with different ideological perspectives who could be really concerned about this issue, could be really not concerned about this issue, but we could just set requirements where people are safe and where this maintenance can happen. I'm just not sure if this 250 flat blanket, 250 foot circle setback is the best way to handle this. I think we could do this in a lot smoother way that doesn't lead to us having to vote on a variance every single time there's development up there. So just something to think about. I don't know where I am on this on first reading, but I'd like us to maybe rethink this a little bit in terms of the direction we're going. I can't run an amendment to do that because it's a different part of the code, but I think we're again, I use the same analogy every time when it comes to these setbacks, but we're cracking nuts with a sledgehammer. And I think we could do this in a better way with some pretty common sense requirements on developments to keep people and future occupants safe. So I'd love thoughts from my colleagues on coming to some type of compromise, maybe a rectangular setback that allows access and work to be done on the sites, and then some requirements to make sure that future occupants of homes are safe. But that's where I am now, Mayor. I am on the fence, and yeah, I think we're swinging way too hard here. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Lyman.
Well, I certainly appreciate Councilmember Linstead's comments, and as always, I'm quite sure that he does have things well thought out, certainly better thought out than I do. I guess I too have grave reservations over this, this whole way we've set things up. It seems to me, and what I was trying to get at with my questioning earlier, is that if we're only looking at 25% and regulating 25% of the wells impacted in the first place, we've missed something. We're clearly missing something. And I very much like the idea that Councilman Linstead just put out with the possibility of putting out increased testing, I still like the idea of informed consent. And I'm sorry that seems to have dropped by the wayside. Letting people know that there's potentially a problem means it puts power in their hands, gives them the ability to participate in their own solution. This potentially is taking land that could be used for, let's face it, for affordable or other housing out of that realm of possibility. And I do know of some of these areas that have had interest from home builders, affordable and otherwise. So that bothers me. I would much rather have a situation where we can put power back in people's hands and let them make their own decisions. The comparison that I keep using is now the 20-year-old discussion or thereabouts on radon. If you own an older home in, especially in the Front Range, but pretty much anywhere in Colorado, if you bought it in the last 20 years, you probably had a radon test when you bought the home. And chances are, just the way these things work, your radon test came back high, and chances are your realtor, you negotiated with the seller to put in a radon mitigation system. That's an example of giving people the power, the understanding, saying, here's a problem. Here's something that could impact your health long-term in this home. It could give you cancer or other respiratory issues. I'm told that radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the country. But we didn't stop building homes in areas where radon is high, which is it's a naturally occurring element in the soil. We mandated that in areas where radon is high, all new homes built have to have radon mitigation systems put in. And it's not particularly, especially if you're building a home, it's not particularly expensive at all. But we didn't simply say, here's a known problem. It's happening on this lot. Therefore, you can't build here. We said, here's a known problem. Here's a logical mechanical fix that doesn't have a huge impact on the cost of the home. Let's deal with it. And I really like Councilmember Linstead's suggestion of coming up with a way to address the very real dangers that these plugged-in abandoned wells may pose. But it puts power to do something different. It puts power back in people's hands. So I think I'll be a no on this tonight. It's not because I don't think we need to protect people. Clearly, it's because I think this is the wrong approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member comments? Councilmember Shad?
Thank you, Mayor. So we've had this conversation in terms of looking at the variance process with the reverse setbacks for PNA wells. And the thing that we have to do is find what that level is going to be. So we know that COGCC is giving guidance to 150-foot setback on PNA wells, so that if there is something that is needed to be done at the PNA well, that there is the room available to do that. We know from the Davis 43-6 well that when things go bad, we need a greater space around that. So I think that at this point, we know that there can be a variance process between 150 and 250. We just don't know what that variance process looks like at this point, but we have to establish the kind of parameters for where that variance process is going to take place. So my preference is to pass this tonight, and then we can move forward with looking at a variance process for something between 150 and 200 feet. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson?
Thank you. Just a couple quick comments here. I looked up the definition of wrench fault, just so we can have a counter one here. Wrench faults have the largest displacements of any continental fault, sometimes hundreds of kilometers accumulated by millions of small movements. So I'm just gonna go with the fact that the COGCC threw out the wrench fault comment, and that was a legitimate remark from them. And one specific reason why we should be concerned that there may be more of these well failures in this area, and our soil gas testing program is not complete. We don't know the status of every well. Yeah, it might just be the one, it might be zero, it might be several, we don't know. And I'm looking forward to the future. I mean, I have kids, we all probably have kids here, and 20 years, 50 years down the road, more than that, these wells are going to be there forever. And we've learned that we can put a little bit more distance between the wells and the homes, and planning can, you know, if we just plan for this and think about the locations of residential developments, as it only applies to residential developments, it does not apply to commercial developments. So just plan accordingly. We have open space requirements, there's roads, there's we plan on so many things. If you could just put this into the forefront of the discussion, that we're going to try to keep residential units further from these wells. I think that would go a long ways to avoiding having wells so close to homes, where if they do fail, it's going to be not a good thing for the community when you find that out. And I wouldn't want to be the resident living next to a failed unit when that workover rate comes in. So I am absolutely voting yes on this. I believe that 250 feet. I mean, ideally it'd be more than that, but we can only, you're trying to find that where's that protective limit at, and it seems from all the information we received that is a decent distance to protect the residents. And it really is about avoiding what we've done in the past. And I'm okay with, if we come up with a variance process, we say 250 feet, and if somebody wants to come forward with a reason why they don't think that 250 feet is necessary, and they we can definitely consider that, but I am voting yes on this. Thank you.
Councilmember Lamb.
The other part of the conversation and the questions that I were directing towards Mr. Valdez was the Carlson 124 well. The Carlson 124 well next to Espen Creek K through 8 elementary was just P&A by extraction. During that P&A, there was a leak in the produced water tank, and there was extensive excavation during that process of soils. At first, extraction thought they had all of the soils remediated, and then they tested the soil again and they didn't, and they had to go back in and dig up a wider swath of the area. There's, no predictability to exactly what this process of remediation is going to look like in every location. So based on the fact that we actually don't know for sure what distance we're going to need, we need to use what we have in front of us. We know that the Carlson 124 needed a 250 foot by 250 foot area to bring in the workover equipment to mobilize and stage all the equipment needed for that excavation. We talked about the Davis 43-6 well extensively now, and the trenches needed for that. Part of the reason for the length of the trenches was that it was all based on where the methane levels from the testing still showed residual subsurface methane, and it wasn't remediating on its own. We had to put in the trenches up to about at least 250 feet. So we have our own examples, and that's what we have to go on right now. In that northeast section of Broomfield, east of I-25, we don't have any infrastructure. The development of that area is significant. I'm sure planning could state exactly how far they think it's off, but it's significant amount of time till that's going to be developed. We have a sufficient amount of time for anyone who is thinking about developing that area to, as Councilmember Anderson said, take into account this P&A reverse setback only applies to residential areas. They can, at this point in time, they can put, they can plan around, they can put mixed, we'll probably have mixed use commercial in that eastern part of I-25. So I really think that anyone who's considering developing that area will be able to sufficiently consider what they have to work with as far as the P&A reverse setback in the decade or so until they actually get around to putting in infrastructure in that area. So I am concerned about protecting the health and safety of the residents, the future residents who will live near these P&A wells. And I think a 250-foot setback is the minimum that we should be considering, and I will vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for my colleagues' input. I'm also still on the fence. I do really appreciate all this conversations about, and it's really sad that we have these examples. I'm not sure any other places like up in Vail, right? They're not having these conversations. So I think this is something that if we're on, some sort of shale, that we're burdened with this. So I just want to be really cognizant of that. So if there's other entities listening to this, it's not all development throughout the state of Colorado. It's development upon places where we can develop, minerals. But thank you to staff who's put a lot of effort into this. I mean, even going out and measuring, these bi-monthly meetings that we're having are pretty intense, and I want to thank you for your time for all of that. I would echo Councilmember Lindstedt's ideas is to see more testing and just more creative ways. If we can have development, but not necessarily. Also, Councilmember Lind noted that it's residential development that's going to be affected. But I would like to see some sort of ways that we could treat this as sort of, on a case-by-case basis, because that's how we treat it to begin with, right? Because that's what I heard up here, is that we do work on a case-by-case basis anyway. And in doing so, we had to do that with all of our wells. Now, what could go in that radius of 250, we're not really sure. There could be just so many unknowns as to what kind of wells we're dealing with, when they were plugged and abandoned. If we're dealing with the last 20-25% of our lands, I know those extensions were meant to be conservative. What does it mean to not be conservative? I do have concerns though about methane being trapped underground, because not like radon, I don't think is explosive. So when we talk about methane is explosive, and if it's under pressure and if it's under the ground, that's very serious. And we've seen that happen before with explosions. So we do have this concern about underground, but I also want to caution my colleagues and just the public in that what we aren't seeing here is the property owner speaking. We aren't seeing, the property owners dealing with these, different scenarios. And then also they might be dealing with our next ordinance that could do producing wells, right? And then our next ordinance. And then slowly we could be boiling this frog, right, to death. If this frog were put in the hot seat, in the hot water right away, and noticing I can't produce anywhere, or I can't develop anywhere, then they'll have issues. So I just want to put caution out there that if this is passed tonight, we have to be very careful about what other sort of setbacks we're going to be dealing with, because then our developers might not be able to develop anything. So I just want to throw those cautions out there. I would like to listen to my colleagues and just sort of get their input tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more councilmember comments? Councilmember Cohen?
Thank you. Being the new representative of this area we're all talking about, I've been trying to conjure the spirit of the Initiative 301, which a large majority of people voted for, and calls on us to basically err on the side of caution to ensure our development is healthy and safe for future homeowners. So I'm looking at this and trying to look at what principle guides us And a couple things from the conversation tonight resonate in terms that these wells will age over time. Most homes are not mobile, so they can't move away. I'm troubled by the idea that whenever these buffers come up, we always say, oh, this will cost us affordable housing. As if affordable housing should be the first home placed next to a well. That shouldn't be the case. If it's not safe for affluent, it's not safe for affordable. I was interested to the informed consent argument. That reminds me of when I bought my house in Broomfield. I asked, is this an HOA? And they said no. And I got my money back from the title company because it was an HOA. Because informed consent sometimes fails. And so what's the cost of that? I certainly, when I moved to Broomfield, I will admit, had absolutely no idea there was oil wells anywhere near my home. And no one ever mentioned it. Because it's invisible for most new homeowners. But is that a solution that we can rely on? I am interested in whether there's other alternative means that we could in the future employ. As Councilmember Winstead mentioned, I believe Fort Collins has a policy where if you have a certain, where they establish additional considerations or standards that must be met for plugging and abandoning a well, then they'll be willing to reduce the buffer to, I think, 150 or 200 feet. I don't know if that's something we could look at or think it's something we could actually enforce on a regular basis. So I'm leaning toward that for supporting this on first reading, interested in more discussion, because I do believe there's this basic principle, and I think it's been established, that we need to be err on the side of caution with health and safety. Whoever moves into these homes will live there for quite some time. We don't know all that much about, it sounds like, the wells degrading and which ones will fail next. We do seem to have established that it will take more than 150 feet often to fix it, and usually 200. So if that's the case, we could err on that side, and maybe there's other means to Councilmember Hinkle's concerns. If this is going to have a massive impact or make development not possible as the rules state now, can we find some other means, higher density, some other variation to our development rules to allow them to get the same units, but in a different method without infringing on this buffer zone? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
So I have a question about a potential amendment that we had sent this to council earlier, and sorry, I shouldn't find this while I was looking. There's a place where if we pass this at 250 feet tonight, that there would then be a lesser setback for a producing well, and maybe Nancy, you could help me find that location really quickly.
Well, that is correct, Councilmember Anderson. So a producing well would fall under 1628-180A, which has a setback of 200 feet. So if 250 feet was passed after the second reading on the 26th, it goes into effect 7 days after. There would be a gap of time before producing wells, which is coming to council in January, would be considered, where plugged and abandoned could have a greater setback than producing wells.
And so I would like to, if it's the right time to propose, we simply amend the 200 to match the setback distance that we are, if I guess it's 250 feet, we can't change that right now. So I would like to propose an amendment to change 1628-180A from 200 feet to 250 feet to match the distance. Is now the right time to bring that up?
Now is an appropriate time.
Okay, so
Madam Mayor, the motion to amend on the floor would need a second.
Councilmember Lim. Okay. And then we would need a 2/3 vote to pass the amendment, since it was just introduced.
I believe we would, but I will defer to Councilmember Anderson, because I know you had sent an email out to all of council. I was just trying to pull it up to see if this was one of the topics that were alerted, that council was alerted to yesterday morning before the 12 o'clock.
Okay, it would be a normal, simple majority threshold of.
I believe it is. Councilmember Anderson, if you give me a second, or if you can respond, if you have included that in your email.
I had included that with a potential amendment along with a couple of the questions, no specific language, but it was, I called out that, email here,
Yes. It was in that email. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm that for all the other members on council. So this has a motion and a second. It's been introduced. The discussion would go to the amendment now.
All right, is there any discussion on the amendment? Yes, Councilmember Lyle.
So after the back and forth, may I respectfully request that we restate the amendment? I'd like to hear it once more, please.
Sure, Councilmember Anderson.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I just lost the question again. Get out of here. Okay, so section 1628(1). Sorry, section 1628(180) A states, with the exception of those oil and gas locations identified in C, and C is the part that we're amending to add the 250-foot setback. So with those exceptions, and also for our pre-producing, that's what that includes, no residential lots in any subdivision shall be platted any closer than 200 feet from an oil and gas facility, as defined in 1754-020. And I would like to amend that to say 250 feet so that it would be at least as great as the proposed reverse setback, just for consistency. Is that clear?
And we're working to get it up on a slide on the board in just a moment.
Did we wait? No?
Start your discussion.
Oh, okay, we're on discussion. Any council member discussion? Councilmember Mack.
This is the logical conclusion from the possibility of of adding the 250 feet from the plug and abandoned well. I mean, we have otherwise in this gap of time that our attorney has identified until January, we have a producing reverse setback that is less than our P&A reverse setback. And there would be, I mean, there's a much higher risk of a need to protect public health and safety next to for residents currently living next to producing wells compared to P&A wells. So it's just a logical conclusion that we should not have our producing well reverse setback less at 200 feet than our P&A reverse setback as proposed at 250 feet. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council member discussion? Councilmember Hinkle.
Have we received the data on that as far as producing wells? I would want to treat producing wells as producing wells. I don't remember talking about producing wells tonight.
I believe in one of, I might defer to Ms. Burton-Zetti on this. I believe in one of the earlier memos, there was a map which showed producing wells, but I don't know if it would have had specifically a 250-foot setback imaged on that map. Is that what you mean, Councilmember Hinkle?
Yeah, I just, I think we need to treat these wells as what they're, what level that they're at, right? So I don't remember talking about, we talked about it in the study session, but then we landed on, plug and abandoned wells. We didn't land on plug and abandoned wells and producing wells. So I guess that might be just a comment, just as a comment. Thanks.
Any other comment? Councilmember Andrews.
I'd just like to quickly respond to that comment, and this was in the email that I sent to all council, that I just indicated that. So here we are looking at the, if you're a producing well and you build up close to it, you cannot get to the 250 feet if you go up to 200 feet. Not to say that that would exactly happen, but this was just to kind of close that loophole from possibly occurring. But if this, if the well case, assuming the well casing is robust, the plug and abandon phase of the well's life should present the least risk of all phases to the health and safety of nearby residents. And that's why I can't imagine a case where the producing well would be safer than the plug and abandon well, because it's got a well casing in every piece, every component of it just has not been plugged yet. So I think that's to be fair, we didn't discuss producing wells, but you're taking a step in the direction to prevent emissions and to end the life cycle at the plug and abandon. So I still firmly believe that you would not want a producing well closer than a plug and abandon well. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cohen?
Can I just ask a question in terms of the amendment? We have been considering, strictly to Councilmember Henkel's point, plugged and abandoned. And I know optically it looks bad if we have 250 for plug and abandon and 200 for producing for a few months. But what do you say to the counter argument that we should consider producing wells separately, completely, and not add this on at this moment?
Councilmember Anderson?
I wasn't sure if I was supposed to respond. Okay. I'm looking over here. I just, we've had these discussions ongoing for months now, and this is something, I don't see this as being terribly new. It's to consider the fact that producing wells have safety concerns. It just goes back to some of what we found in the various, looking back at the Carlson 124 well and other ones, the Shannon Roberts well, some of these other ones that we have. It's not just the casing failures of a plug and abandon well, but then you also have all the above ground associated equipment. You have the tanks and the produced water tanks, gas tanks. So often, every time we go to remediate one of these wells, we find a deficiency every time, to be fair. And many times we go to remediate these wells after plug and abandon them, we find historic leaks from either producing water or the oil and gas storage tanks. So I just don't see how we would ever want a producing setback less than a plug and abandon setback. But I will leave it up to each individual on council to decide if we want to have I understand the point that we could come back, assuming we come back in 3 or 4 months and we can correct this, but I would feel more confident just knowing that we address it now. But I will leave that up to each individual. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and take a vote on the amendment on the screen. We have a motion in a second. Should we do a roll call?
You can, either way.
Real quick, please call the roll. We're voting on Councilmember Anderson's amendment to increase the producing well reverse setback from 200 to 250.
Anderson,
Yes.
Cohen,
No.
Grimm,
No.
Hinkle,
No.
Kuzinski,
Yes.
Law Evans,
No.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Shack.
Yes.
That passes 5-4. Okay. Now we move on to the ordinance number 2164 as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Before the amendment came up.
To speak?
Yeah, to speak on the initial.
I'm so sorry, Councilmember Lindstedt. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think I'll support this tonight on first reading. I don't know if I could support this on second reading. I didn't have a problem with the 50 feet on producing wells, but I just want to say I vehemently disagree with my friend and colleague, Councilmember Lot Evans, on this issue, because I think we really do need to address this. I also disagree with Councilmember Lim on doing this with a 250-foot blanket radius based on kind of an extraordinary circumstance with one well in this town. So as this moves toward a second reading, I would like to see us consider some changes to this distance. And to Councilmember Cohen's point about health and safety first, I think if we're really thinking about health and safety first, we would have started with our building code within 250 feet of P&A wells and not just a blanket setback that, if you're considering developing a plot of land, I mean, the unpredictability of a variance process I don't think that's good policy. So I think we really need to consider some concrete changes to our building code so that developers have predictability when they want to consider building, and we're not just creating this kind of strange variance process that we're going to have to deal with every single time there's a development in the northern part of town. But we really do need to fix these setbacks, because we shouldn't have any homes that 25 feet from a P&A well that doesn't work. So we need to change this somehow. But at 250 feet, I'm going to struggle on second reading, but I'll support this to keep the conversation moving forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further discussion, we're going to have the roll call vote on ordinance number 2164 as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Cohen,
Yes.
Groom,
No.
Hinkle,
Yes.
Jezerski.
Yes.
Law Evans,
No.
Lim,
Yes.
Lindstedt,
Yes.
Shaft,
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
That passes 7-2. Thank you all. Well, seeing that it's 8:10, let's take a quick 10-minute break and come back at 8:22. Thank you all for your patience.
The Access Live event is in music hold. Music hold ended.
And we're back. It's 8:22. Our next item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration on second and final reading of proposed ordinance number 2159, amending section 2-60-060 of the Broomfield Municipal Code, removing the residency requirement of the chief of police. I'll now declare the public hearing open. We'll follow the city's standard public hearing procedures. First, staff will present a summary of the proposal. Next, we'll have the applicant's presentation if applicable. That's a fun one. Then we'll ask for public comments and final comments from the applicant. Yes, that's you, Nikki. Finally, questions from the city council members. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor. Nikki Macklin, Director of Human Resources, is here on the second reading to field any additional questions that may have arisen since the first hearing. Ms. Macklin.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. As stated, I'm here to present the second reading for the proposed ordinance, number 2159, which would remove the residency requirement for the chief of police. If this ordinance is approved, the requirement would be removed, and this change is needed to expand the potential applicant pool during the recruitment to ensure that the city and county is able to attract and retain the most qualified police chief candidate, regardless of their residency. As you'll remember, last month, we had a very substantive discussion for about an hour and covered a lot. So in the interest of your time, I won't revisit all of that, but certainly am available to answer any questions that may have come up since then.
Thank you for your brevity, Ms. Macklin. We'll now proceed with public comments. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please step up to the podium and state your name and neighborhood for the record. Seeing none, I don't see any on the telephone. So we'll start with questions from council next. Members should limit themselves to questions. The time to address amendments and state positions for or against is later. Are there any questions from council? Seeing none. Next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2159. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2159 by title? It didn't tell me to. Do I need to close it? Close it?
I think we're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, Sam, we'll make sure if we open a hearing, we'll close the hearing, but the vote will officially close the hearing, even if it wasn't on the radar.
Mayor, before we, since we have a little pause, can I ask a question real quick?
Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to get my question in. So I did want to ask, some of the concerns that I've heard from the public has been without the residency requirement, how is the chief of police going to kind of be able to get the pulse of the community and kind of better understand kind of what the realities of that community are?
Ms. Hoffman, do you want to address that first?
You bet. I think part of those questions takes into account Councilmember Schaaf. Not necessarily what Broomfield has been, continues to be, and will be in the future. Our police department is deeply integrated in every single aspect, every single thing that we do. And to think that we would select a police chief that doesn't embody that, it just isn't going to happen.
Thank you for that. And, I think that, it's not only just our police chief, but our police officers. It seems like, are they any less dedicated to Broomfield citizens because they don't live here?
Resoundingly, unequivocally, I can say absolutely not.
Thank you for answering my question. Thank you for allowing the questions there.
All right, any other further comment? There being no further comments, the public hearing is closed. Next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2159. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2159 by title?
Ordinance number 2159, amending section 2-60-060 of the Broomfield Municipal Code, removing the residency requirement for the chief of police.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Lindstedt.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that ordinance number 2159 be adopted on second and final reading in order to publish. That's in full, published?
By title.
In order to publish or order, what? I think your motion's wrong here. I move that ordinance number 2159 be adopted on second and final reading in order to publish by title. Is that right? Okay, yeah, we're missing part of it on the script here. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Shaw?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Lyons.
Well, I hate to be negative, but I won't be supporting this tonight. I mean, I really do hate to be negative. I'm a pretty positive person. And my objections are not directed toward any specific person or any specific circumstance. And I did hear Manager Hoffman's assertion that, and I truly believe, I know from my own experience, that the BPD is closely integrated into the community. I feel like it's important to consider what the situation could look like several years, maybe several decades down the road. And I feel, and the feedback that I've gotten from my constituents is that it's very important that our police chief themselves be living in our community, be integrated into our community that closely. So I would be willing, I'm pretty sure this is going to go ahead and pass, otherwise I would have prepared an amendment. But if anyone else is interested, I would be willing to consider something like, dare I say, after our extended discussion a few moments ago, a variance process where preferential, we could state something like preference would be given to applicants who already live in, or who are willing, either already live or are willing to live in the city of County Broomfield, but that doesn't disqualify anyone. And if anyone is interested in that sort of amendment, then I would be happy to take it up, but I'm guessing no one is. So at any rate, I can't support this as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more council member discussion? I just want to reiterate that this is not our hire. This is the hire of our city and county manager, who we hire to make these decisions. So we should all be facilitating that hire by giving her the most latitude to choose from the largest applicant pool. So if I don't get to vote, that's okay, but I would support it. Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I did get some comments from some people that were concerned that by changing it changing the residential requirement, that we would be losing something. But I've heard from many more of our residents that it is so important that we continue to have the best police department in the state of Colorado, in the state of everywhere, right? And that is the best thing. And that the culture that Broomfield has been able to cultivate for years is what is important. And so continuing to have exceptional officers, continuing to attract exceptional chiefs, that is what we want. And if we need, in order to do that, if we need to remove the residency in order to get the best, I am entirely 100% on board with that. So I will be supporting this tonight. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Groom.
Yes.
Hinkle.
Yes.
Kuzinski. Law Evans.
No.
Lim.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
Yes.
Schaff.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
That passes 8-1. Thank you all very much. Our final item under council business this evening is the public hearing and council's consideration on second and final reading of proposed ordinance number 2160, amending chapter 9-49 of the Broomfield Municipal Code relating to unlawful graffiti in the city and county of Broomfield. I'll now declare the public hearing open, and we will follow the city standard public hearing procedures as previously outlined. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Brandon Murray is our code enforcement chief. Given again that this is the second reading, Mr. Murray can address or field any additional questions. Mr. Murray.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. I'm here presenting on second reading, ordinance 2160. And again, it does mainly two things. It amends the current definition of graffiti, as well as add a requirement on property owners or responsible parties to remove graffiti. Currently, we have an ordinance that prohibits causing graffiti on any property, but nothing that gives us the authority to require its removal once it's in place there. So again, I'm here for any questions, if you have any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray. We'll now proceed with public comment. Does any member of the public have comments on this agenda item? Step up and state your name and neighborhood for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and Council. My name is John Ewalt, and I live in the Pinnacle North neighborhood. I know this proposed ordinance is well-intentioned, and I originally didn't find the proposal overly oppressive, but I was bothered by the fact that the victim of a crime could be punished potentially more severely than the criminal of the original crime. I wasn't able to attend the council meeting for first reading, but I did watch the recording, and I was surprised to learn that for those in the know, that the ordinance will never be enforced. The property owner simply has to state that they gave consent for the graffiti, and all of a sudden the graffiti becomes art. So I have to ask, is graffiti really a problem in Broomfield? We're not Seattle, we're not Denver, or any of the other cities that were used as examples of where graffiti is a problem. I rarely see graffiti in the areas of Broomfield that I frequent. Granted, I don't travel all across Broomfield, but I don't see graffiti as being a problem. The genesis of this ordinance was graffiti at the drive-in theater, the box on 120th and Perry Street, which is right next to Arvada Pediatrics. I've been taking my kids to Arvada Pediatrics since they were born. My daughter's now 12. There's always been graffiti on that box. This is nothing new. It was only new to a person who didn't like what they saw and had the ear of a city council member that was able to bring this ordinance forward. I'm not in favor of graffiti on any building, but when graffiti is there for that long and nothing's been done about it, is it really that big of a problem that we have to address in a 2-week span period of time? I think it would be better to, instead of rush this ordinance, take the time to craft it more with better language to make it more appropriate, and just take the time to make it right. Would it be possible before the vote this evening to have a readout of how many reports of graffiti are made in Broomfield over a year's time? And then how many citations or arrests result from those graffiti events? What is the fine or restitution levied on anyone cited for causing graffiti? And are those that are caught creating graffiti given service hours to remove the graffiti that either they created or that someone else has created? I have no proposal that would make this ordinance better, but the ordinance as proposed will only impact those that don't have the free time to attend city councils or watch the recording, or they don't have the resources to know that they can simply consent to the art that someone placed on their property. This will adversely impact those of lower means and access, which I know this is something the city council is working hard to avoid or eliminate. To the 6 city council members who voted for the ordinance on the first reading, please reconsider your vote, especially those of you that spoke to the unenforceable nature of the ordinance as written, and then proceeded to vote in favor of it. And I'm sure that with community outreach, Broomfield volunteers would be willing to help anyone who doesn't have the means or ability to remove graffiti. Surely this would be a better solution to a very infrequent problem, instead of writing an ordinance that has major issues just to address a problem that may not really exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? I don't see any online. So questions from council are next, and members should limit themselves to questions during this portion. The time to introduce amendments and state positions for or against are later. Are there any questions from council? Councilmember Broom?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with, how much graffiti is an issue in Broomfield? Do we really get this once a year, twice a year, where there's obscenity in the graffiti that's inappropriate?
Ask Mr. Murray to address that. He has the best sense, Councilmember Broom.
Thank you.
I don't have exact numbers. Currently, we don't, code compliance doesn't investigate reports of graffiti when they first come in. They'll go to the police department. They take those initial reports. As far as tracking those situations of graffiti that haven't been removed and the complaints that come in about those, because it hasn't been in code that we could do anything about, we haven't tracked it. A general sense, a dozen a year would be a general sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Henkel?
Sure, thank you, Mayor, and I apologize to my colleagues that I couldn't be here in first reading. My house was falling apart. Thank you for your comments tonight, Mr. Ewald. I wanted to ask a question of staff. I'm not quite sure who this would be as well, but the issue that this resident had was that, they were doing a lot of investigating on their part, as to what we could do versus what others could do. And then what does it look like? So my question is what does this look like for staff if we don't have something implemented versus if we do have something implemented? Because my response to her response was, well, we just keep calling them and we keep calling them and asking. And then all we do is we just keep receiving these complaints. So I'm just curious as to how much staff time we've been putting into following up with people, asking them over and over to do it versus just sending them a letter. What would that look like?
As far as, I think we're mainly talking about the drive-in site, because that was the most recent example. And my staff received a half dozen complaints, and those conversations over the phone can take 5-10 minutes or longer. Whereas if we get a complaint, we prepare a notice. In fact, with that particular property owner, we have their phone number, we call them up and tell them they got to take care of it, and we'd be backed by code requiring that removal. It would be handled very quickly. As far as handling an initial complaint.
Yeah. Okay.
Councilmember Hinkle, we oftentimes we see them on electrical boxes, which is either Excel. So again, there isn't a lot of staff time, and on the drive-in, there were a lot of comments how swift that process was done, and a lot the folks thought that staff had done it So generally, because if it doesn't come in through code compliance, it comes in through parks, because that's generally where it is. It's either at our rest stops or on those electrical boxes, so it doesn't even hit Mr. Murray's. And those are quick, so the staff time is minimal. And we're grateful that we do not have a graffiti problem anywhere near where some of the other communities do.
Any other council member questions? Councilmember Anderson?
Chris, is one other piece and thing with you all for your comments on this one, because this is still a little bothersome to me, but yet I hear our code compliance department, that this would help them to enforce it. It is the wording. I just had a tab up here and I looked back. It was prior consent, right? Like in the ordinance, it says that something to the effect of the graffiti it would be graffiti if there wasn't prior consent of the owner. So you'd have to justify why you thought if there was graffiti put on your property, or if somebody puts on your property that would look to be graffiti, but you wanted to say it was, oh, I really wanted it there, that could be challenged because it needed prior consent. So you'd have to show when you prior consented to it, right? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense.
Okay,
And that's part and parcel of, kind of chase down the purpose of the ordinance. So do we anticipate that occurring, that somebody would graffiti someone's yard or fence or house, and then the private property owner of the yard or fence or house would say, no, I really like this. We don't foresee that occurring. But we're all seeing a lot of things that we never thought we'd see. So.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, that was the prior consent was the kind of piece that I was looking at that makes it a little more challenging. And then one other question I was just looking this up, and I didn't get that far before my turn came up on chapter. Any person who violates the first section of the graffiti prohibited is in accordance with chapter 112. And is that a lesser penalty than the individual who needs to remove the graffiti? The fees of the, it was like 250 for the first violation, 500 and 750. Like what is the penalty for the individual who violates graffiti prohibited? Do we know that? Because that really is concerning, because you don't want to make. I see the concern there.
Yeah, it's unintended consequences, right? That may very well fall into that category. Nancy, can you help me out here?
Councilmember Anderson is correct that there are limited penalties for the violation of the graffiti ordinance. So the judge would be maxed at that sentence if and when there was a conviction of the person who actually did the graffiti. And we didn't put those limitations in the proposed ordinance requiring removal of graffiti if somebody fails to remove it. Although I will add that, and if our city prosecutor was here, she'd probably say it's very rare for the court to go that high as it can on fines. And the court, particularly Judge Bachman, takes into account a lot of circumstances before issuing fines, and could take into account that the perpetrator has a 250 fine. I'm not going to do that to the owner, something greater than that to the owner. So the judge has discretion to address the issue you raised.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful. So it says in G, it's like the fines of 250. Those would not necessarily have to be that high. Those could be at the discretion. Okay, that's helpful to know. And I know we're on second reading here, and this is, this gives that ability to enforce. And if we wanted to in the future, we could come back and revise this if we desire, correct? So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. So just for council's reference, in the last 2 weeks, I've reported 3 incidents of graffiti Two of those, I think maybe all three of those were on Excel boxes. Two of those sites were re-graffiti. I don't know if that's the right word, that they were re-tagged and within the last 6 months. So it's not that I wouldn't say that it's a problem, but it is something that happened. So knowing that this ordinance kind of came about with the drive-in theater box at 120th and Perry Street, I'm curious. Well, I guess I just want to put it on the record. So explain how that has. So first question: has it been resolved? Has the graffiti been removed?
Yes.
And how? And what
Within
did
about 24 hours of reaching out to them.
What did it take to finally get the graffiti removed? Not necessarily the operation, but what was the conversation?
It was our streets department. And it was the property owner. Again, when it was brought to our attention, the first part of the conversation, Councilmember Schaaf, is it's just always easier and better to do it ourselves. So we were really just seeking permission to get on the site, but there were additional conversations that had been occurring in planning and engineering of demolishing that site. So then it went from, why would we, paint over it if in fact demolishing it is imminent? And so demolish it or allow us access, or so we didn't get a lot of options. We said, hey, choose from one of the three above, and they did, and their response was swift.
And I mean, I guess that kind of goes to like the dilapidated buildings or not cared for buildings that, when stuff kind of continues to deteriorate on that site, how do we address that? And, sometimes it's somebody else's timeline, not necessarily the surrounding neighbor's timeline that's associated with that. So, I mean, it seems like that there was a solution found for this particular site. I haven't heard of any other private properties that have graffiti on them that is an issue. And I think that, at this point, I think that we're solving the problem that was there. It may have taken some time, but I think that we ended up solving that problem. And I think that, we ought to continue that practice. And I also think that, kudos to our staff for taking it upon themselves to take care of that problem. And I think that is one of those concerns, is that it shouldn't just fall onto the property owner to address this in an immediate way, though that is what is preferable, is to address it quickly, so that it doesn't become a bigger affair. So I think at this point, the ordinance is probably a little bit too far out in front of us, and I won't be supporting this tonight.
Thank you. Any other council member questions? Seeing none, the public hearing is closed. Next is council's consideration of proposed ordinance number 2160. Will the clerk please read proposed ordinance number 2160 by title?
Ordinance number 2160, amending chapter 9-49 of the Broomfield Municipal Code relating to unlawful graffiti in the city and county of Broomfield.
Thank you. Is there a motion? Councilmember Henkel?
I move that ordinance number 2160 be adopted on second and final reading and ordered published by title.
Is there a second? Councilmember Pro-Tem.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Cohen?
I would just like to mention, I just happened at work today to be looking through an old document at my university and came across the credo for 1953. And one of the many lines said, "We believe in a natural right of private property, but likewise that private property has its social obligations." And I think that speaks to the issues that we aren't on islands, and what affects our property affects our neighbors. And we are obligated by law to keep things up to code, to keep things safe, in this case, to keep it clean so the neighborhood doesn't degrade. I think we should celebrate the fact we don't have a graffiti problem. Hopefully that stays that way. But if there ever is one, I don't think we want to be in a position of relying on city staff to go become graffiti cleaners. And we want to be able to eliminate the problems quickly, because that is the most proven strategy of holding off graffiti. If you let it sit there, it propagates, and you need to remove it quickly. And that is why many cities have this ordinance, have had it for many years, and they have requirements to remove graffiti quickly. Many cities also have programs to support private owners if they need help in removing it. So I think I would ask you to think of the property owner, the business owner who's next door to a building that's been tagged, and the owner won't do anything about it. What will happen is that eventually that building owner will get tagged as well, and then the neighborhood will degrade if it's left to itself. So I think this is a simple solution, waiting for the problem. Hopefully it never comes, but when it does, this will solve it quickly. I think it protects the property owner who is keeping his building up and shouldn't be penalized because his neighbor doesn't uphold his responsibilities to clean up the graffiti. And to Councilmember Schaaf's note about the requirement of the property owner, I mean, the same law applies to if the building needs to be condemned. It shouldn't be called upon the city to go tear it down. It's just an obligation of the property owner to take care of it under the law. And it's sort of the same concept here. Hopefully we never have a problem, but if we do, next time this will be in place and we can resolve it quickly.
Thank you. Councilmember Lavin, Councilmember Hinkle, then Lavin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for speaking tonight and input. I really appreciate that the issue that brought this on, it was taken care of, but it also, when you own a property, you should take care of it. I mean, that's just part of owning a property as well. So I don't want, kids and parents, all on alarm on their drive home from school. Mom, Dad, what is that? They're having a conversation about what their community is changing into. So I do think it's upon the property owner just to have just normal upkeep. That's something I do in my own house. It's something that we all do in general. So I do like the ideas that, the Home Depot is going to get 10% off to any supplies, and Brookfield Pals volunteer program could be an option for removing graffiti in case there's any sort of hardship. But what I really like about it too is that part on the code letter H, where it says nothing in this section shall impose a duty upon the city to remove or eradicate graffiti, because it shouldn't be our job necessarily to remove graffiti on someone else's property. Nothing in this section shall provide or prevent the city from giving additional notice and time to the property owner or responsible person to remove the graffiti, should it appear to the city that extra notice and time is likely to produce prompt removal of the graffiti. So if we give extra time, to remove it, it seems like, there's ways that we can work with people as well. I had to do that with my house when they asked me to remove a dead pine tree. I said, hey, I can't get any tree removal businesses out here, in 4 weeks, until 4 weeks. So your whole 2 weeks, I can't do it. And they worked with me. So I think there's a way and a workable solution to this. But I also think too, that we need to be able to tell our taxpayers, hey, we have a law and we're willing to act on it. And we're willing to make, your community cleaner because it's your neighborhood too. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Lavin.
Thank you, Mayor. I hate to be 0-for-3 tonight, but I'm going to be 0-for-3 tonight. I very much appreciate Councilmember Schaaf's comments, and to Councilmember Hinkle's comments. Every commercial property owner that I know, and I know a fair number of them, they do keep their property up. But what this does is criminalizes the victim of a crime, and that's my major objection to it. If there was a provision in there that the city will help or something like that, 10% at Home Depot, given that construction materials have risen 40% in the past couple of years anyway, is not particularly compelling to me. But if truly we need to keep neighborhoods clean, and I agree with that sentiment, then why aren't neighborhoods helping individual property owners with this? This, like I said, my bottom line is I can't support this. It criminalizes the victim of a crime. I can't go along with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, public hearing is closed, and we're going to vote. So, all in favor? Opposed? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Hinkle.
Yes.
Jezerski.
Yes.
Law Evans.
No.
Lim.
Yes.
Lindstedt.
No.
Chef.
No.
Anderson.
Yes.
Cohen.
Yes.
Broom.
No. That passes 5-4.
Mayor, before we move on, if I could have a moment?
Of course.
Thank you. I wanted, I didn't tell you this was happening. I want to introduce council to Ashlyn Balut, who is our intern from Legacy High School. She's working with us this semester, and the graffiti ordinance was an ordinance I had her just monitor to see the process. But in having to attend this meeting, she actually got to see a lot of really cool legislation go through the process. So I just want to introduce Ashlyn to the council and say hello and say thank you. It's a great program and we're really happy to participate in it.
Did you want to speak at the podium and get the full experience?
I appreciate y'all.
Take public comment for everything. All right, thank you, Ms. Rogers. The city and county attorney's report is next. Ms. Rogers, do you have a report?
Just saved it for that. The notebooks that we've been discussing in email are on the credenza in the council room for those who would like them. And I will be sending an email later on this evening that I'd like you all to check out. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member of council have any comments or questions for Ms. Rogers?
That's okay.
It's coming. The city and county manager's report is next. Ms. Hoffman, do you have a report?
Now that the second reading has concluded, we will be posting the police chief's position tomorrow. We're going to have it open for 30 days and then do a pretty intensive, as all the department heads and CMO knows well, what those next couple of phases look like. We do hope Chief Krieger, who just returned from his Italy trip, he and I are working on some possible contract negotiations to keep him close to Broomfield with regards to legislation as we move forward on this legislative session. Yes, I know that everybody would be pretty happy about that. Now he's locked in because I have said it. So we do hope to have an offer on the table by the end of November, beginning of December.
Wonderful. Does any member of council have any comments or questions for Ms. Hoffman? Mayor Pro Tem.
Totally unrelated, but inquiring minds want to know, is there a moose on the loose in Broomfield? Maybe I have breaking news that you guys don't know about.
Is it an inside joke or something?
Actually,
wait, what? What's it? So is it like?
that's a serious, actually, it's a serious question. There were apparently moose sightings in the Legacy McKay area.
Oh my gosh, tonight you need to get home.
I know.
I haven't heard anything. The president called the Donna emergency number for moose sighting, so. Prince, have you heard anything?
I have not. I saw a moose yesterday, but it was not in Broomfield.
This could be a social media.
Could be a frenzy,
Frenzy.
now that you've started. We're
We've had those come down our board, yeah. Maybe Broomfield has become a moose tourist attraction.
A moose mecca. The last piece, Mayor, before we conclude, Sam, who is seated with you at the dais tonight, Sam Monroe, she has gotten a really great offer back home in Georgia. we all know how expensive things are out here. And Sam has, now with 2 grandchildren, another one on the way.
Two more on the way.
2 more on the way, and 2 that are with her, and her husband. And, so the ties to Georgia are tight, and we will miss her and her dogged determination, for getting us through COVID, which was really remarkable. And, her strength and presence is something that's kind and sweet and thoughtful, and she will be very missed.
Thank you.
Don't make me cry.
Anybody want to have questions or comments on that? All right, there's no legislative update or business before the Broomfield Urban Renewal Authority or the Arista Local Improvement District Board of Directors. Additionally, there are no special reports or requests for future action this evening, including our agenda. Is there any other business to come before the council? There being no further business, this council meeting